Our second story is called Mr. Man and Little Miss Adventure on Wheels, written by the same artists. It was a remarkably odd day for Mr. Busy. He had got up early, as usual, got washed, brushed his teeth, eaten his breakfast, and cleaned the house from top to bottom, as usual, then discovered that he had nothing to do. Everything on his to-do list had been crossed off. Mr. Busy sat at his kitchen table and looked at the clock. What was he going to do for a whole day? And then it occurred to him. He would do nothing. He would have a day doing nothing at the beach. As the sun rose, Mr. Busy set off in his car. He soon reached a building site. Mr. Uppity was building a new house for himself. Mr. Uppity already had a house, a huge house, but he wanted an even bigger house. The building site was chaos. Mr. Wrong had dug a hole with his digger, but he had dug it in the wrong place. Mr. Uppity was furious. Mr. Forgetful had forgotten to turn off his cement mixer, and Mr. Uppity was even more furious about that. Mr. Busy looked at the chaos. He had thought about his plan to do nothing for the day, but he just could not help himself. He had to get involved, and he had to get busy. So he got busy sorting everything out with a bulldozer, and being the busy fellow he is, he soon had everything finished. Mr. Busy waved goodbye and continued on his way to the beach. Outside the fire station, the fire crew were all standing on the pavement looking very worried. Miss Quick, who drove the fire engine, had been in such a hurry to leave when the alarm had rung that she had driven off before the fire crew could get on board. Mr. Busy gave the fire crew a lift to the fire. The beach could wait. There was plenty of the day left to do nothing. As he watched the fire crew putting out the fire, he heard a sudden cry of pain. "Ow, I burned my—" began Mr. Bump. "Don't worry," cried Mr. Busy. And without letting Mr. Bump finish his sentence, Mr. Busy bundled him into the back of an ambulance and drove into the hospital with the sirens ringing. However, on the way, they got stuck behind Mr. So and his steamroller, so Mr. Busy took a shortcut. Across the fields. It was very bumped about Mr. Bump, who arrived at the hospital. And as it turned out, after all, Mr. Bump had only burnt his tongue on a cup of hot tea. Oh my! After leaving the hospital, Mr. Busy set off for the beach again, but along the way, he spotted a very puzzled Mr. Funny next to a pile of red noses outside his red nose factory. Mr. Funny's worker, Miss Slate, was late for work. Mr. Busy quickly got to work packing the red noses in boxes. Then he loaded the boxes into Mr. Funny's delivery lorry using a forklift truck. Then Mr. Busy drove Mr. Funny's delivery lorry to the shop. Just look at Mr. Funny's car. Mr. Funny thanked him for all his help, and with a big smile on his face... Hold on. There we go. And with a big smile on his face, Mr. Busy continued his journey to the beach. Overhead, he saw Farmer Field's farm. It was the busiest time of the year on the farm, and Farmer Field needed all the help he could get. However, the help that he had got was no help at all. Mr. Muddle had tipped the grain in the pigsty. And Miss Scatterbrain was trying to plough the pond. Mr. Busy knew just what was needed, a tow truck. In no time at all, Mr. Busy had sorted out the mess. He decided he even had time to harvest a field of barley before he went to beach. Mr. Busy was about to reach the beach. He could even see it, but it was on the other side of a racetrack where Mr. Rush was looking for someone to race with. and old Mr. Busy could not resist the challenge. Mr. Rush climbed onto his motorbike, and Mr. Busy got into a racing car. On the count of 3, they were off. Mr. Rush was the fastest thing on 2 legs, and he thought he was also the fastest thing on 2 wheels. But Mr. Busy was even faster on 4 wheels. He sped past Mr. Rush and over the finish line first. But he didn't stop there. He raced out onto the racetrack and onto the beach. Mr. Busy had finally arrived. But the sun was setting and it was time to go home. So much for Mr. Busy's day of doing absolutely nothing. Time for our quiz.